All right, joining us now, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and host of Andrea Mitchell Reports, Andrea Mitchell. Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University historian Jon Meacham, and award-winning historian, columnist, and writer Jonathan Alter. He is the author of the book, His Very Best, Jimmy Carter, A Life.
And, of course, that would apply to Jonathan, to Rosalynn Carter, would it not? She gave her very best at all times. And, you know, it was actually so wonderful to hear this girl who grew up poor in rural Georgia talking about how she loved politics and how she loved being part of making the world a better place.
Absolutely. This is an epic American story. You know, they were married for 77 years, but they actually met each other 96 years ago, shortly after Rosalynn Carter was born. She had been delivered by Lillian Carter, Jimmy's mother, who was a nurse. And Ms. Lillian brought her toddler around to see the new baby. This was an extraordinary partnership that I think took her into the first ranks of first ladies in the whole history of this country. And we could talk all day about her substantive accomplishments, but just to focus on one, she was the greatest champion of mental health that we've seen. And she did more than anyone to end the stigma that was attached to mental illness until really the 1970s and 80s, when she got active in this issue. And there are just a number of substantive accomplishments that have been completely neglected by history, and also just her personal qualities. You know, I interviewed more than 250 people for my book, and many of them had some critical things to say about Jimmy Carter. I never heard a single word of criticism of Rosalynn Carter, who had a superior political intelligence to her husband, as he was the first to admit, and also a grace that touched everyone she met.
Yeah, her genteel approach, it masked, in a way, her incredible power and strength, and I think that was the secret sauce among many. I went through some old pictures and also my father's book, Power and Principle, which has his diaries from the White House that he goes through. And I'll just read. Carter once said something quite revealing, that while he would reassess over time his view of a person and often revise it quite drastically, for Rosalynn, her first impression was decisive. It never altered. He talks about walking into an empty theater at the White House and seeing them holding hands alone in the theater, watching a movie. He said, Carter also told me that every evening the two of them would read jointly a chapter from the Bible, typical of his unending quest for self-improvement, that during the first year of the presidency, they did so in Spanish, so that they could enhance their mastery of that language. And finally, Rosalynn could be as tough as she was charming and gracious. She gave the White House both grace and warmth, and did so without flaunting either status or power or, as lately has been the case, wealth. For Carter, she was a tower of strength, a source of serene affection, and of good judgment. And just to give you a sense of her importance, in this book, the beginning of it has all the key players. It's called Relating to Key Players in the Top Team of the White House. And before you get to Walter Mondale, Cyrus Vance, Harold Brown, is Rosalynn Carter. My father was the first national security advisor to have cabinet-level status. Rosalynn Carter sat in on cabinet meetings. Well,
and Andrea, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that caused quite a stir. Years before Hillary Clinton caused quite a stir as a first lady, Rosalynn Carter being such a strong force in the president's life was, I mean, it was really first time since Eleanor Roosevelt that a first lady played such a prominent role.
Exactly. And she actually played a bigger role in that White House than Eleanor did, because her relationship with Jimmy Carter was so passionate, so personal, so equal in a way that Eleanor Roosevelt's never was with FDR, and we know about the problems in their marriage as well. Rosalind Carter really established the office of the First Lady. It became a budgeted office, an official office, even though other First Ladies had done many things, positive things before. And she was such a pathbreaker. My first interview with her was actually on Labor Day, 1978. I was new to NBC. It was my first trip to Andrews Air Force Base. I was very excited. I had been at NBC maybe a month. She was filling in for Jimmy Carter on a political trip on Labor Day, campaigning in Texas for a Democratic senator or a candidate for Senate. And so I did an interview with her for the Today Show. Exactly, we taped it on Sunday night for a Monday morning Labor Day interview. And I remember how intimidated I was and how comfortable she made me. She was so kind and so generous. And then I ended up being sort of the backup correspondent as the new kid on the block, going to planes for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and all the holidays, backing up the lead correspondents, Judy Woodruff and the great late John Palmer. So we had quite a team, and I just admired her so much. She supported the Equal Rights Amendment. She was forceful. In 1977, their first year in the White House, she went on a diplomatic trip to Latin America. It was 12,000 miles, 7 countries, 13 days, and she was talking to the leaders there about nuclear energy, agricultural exports, all kinds of diplomatic issues that was part of her remit. I mean, she was just extraordinary.
Remarkable.
She really was. And, John Meacham, hearing her quote in the Lester Holt package, talking about how she got irritated when people said that he was a good former president. She said, well, he was a good president. And I know that she was deeply wounded, as was Jimmy Carter, by the 1980 loss. And as is often the case, it certainly was the case with Harry Truman. The assessment of Jimmy Carter, of course, grows by the year. We look back, and especially now, recognize what he did. A Middle East peace breakthrough, the first really, and the most significant. Opened relations with China, changed the world. Championed human rights in a way no American president had ever done, while beginning at the end of his presidency the military ramp up that, along with the championing of human rights, was something that, along with Reagan, helped lead to the downfall of the Soviet Union. Historians, no doubt, will be much kinder to Jimmy Carter and of course, Rosalind and the voters were in 1980.
Yeah, and John Alter has started this conversation brilliantly in his book. One of the things the Carter's living legacy shows us is that history and headlines do not always move in tandem. And what's important in retrospect is often controversial or ignored in real time. And I think the Carter's experience in the White House is something that should teach us that instant reflexive reactions to everything that happens every minute of every day might just be wrong in the long term. As Howard Baker, who helped President Carter with the Panama Canal Treaty, much to the irritation of a lot of people in Tennessee, once said, there is the possibility that the other fella might be right. And I think to some extent that's a legacy of the Carters. The other thing is, I think we should perhaps, there's been a lot of talk about, obviously, Mrs. Roosevelt and Mrs. Carter. I wonder, and again, John knows this better than I do, I've always thought of Mrs. Ford and Mrs. Carter in a kind of bracket, because in that tumultuous decade when the culture was changing so rapidly in the 1970s, Mrs. Ford helps reduce the stigma with breast cancer. Mrs. Carter with mental health, there was this kind, and very different women, different parties, their husbands ran against each other, but a kind of common humanity and a reminder that, and particularly the unfolding Ford-Carter friendship, which was a little like the Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush one, a reminder that there has been a moment 20 minutes ago in American politics where not every political issue had to be an occasion for total war, that there could be disagreement without there being disunion. And I think that's something else to think about for a moment or two this week as she's commemorated.
And Jonathan Alter, we will give you the last word here. What else should we all be keeping in mind about the life and legacy of Mrs. Carter?
Well, you know, after Rosalynn Carter left the White House, she founded something called the Center for Caregiving. Now, every person in the world is either a caregiver, going to be a caregiver, or is going to need the care of a friend or relative. But the concept didn't really exist until the 1980s. And she has done a lot, not just to destigmatize mental illness, but to create an appreciation of the importance of caregiving. And then there are just a whole series of other accomplishments. She got 33 states to require vaccination before children could enter schools, which contributed greatly to public health in the United States. And I just want to end by reemphasizing Jon Meacham's point that historians look at these figures in a different way than journalists do. You know, as a journalist, I wonder how popular is somebody in their own time. Historians need to look at how they changed this country and the world. And by that standard, Rosalynn Carter and Jimmy Carter stack up very well.
Jonathan Alter, Andrea Mitchell, and Jon Meacham, thank you all so much for joining us this morning.